Hi everyone. On June 8th, the Holy Orthodox Church celebrates the memory of Saint Ephraim, the Patriarch of Antioch. Now, he is not as well known as Ephraim the Syrian, who we all know so well, but is someone who was very much involved in both the politics and the religious disputes of his time, and went through a lot of trouble to try and establish the Orthodox faith. It was not easy, as the time he lived, which was in the early to mid 500s, was a very tumultuous time, especially because of Origenism that was still running rampant all over the empire, as well as the non-Chalcedonians, who were quite violent in many of their activities and were also growing in numbers in important places like Constantinople and Alexandria. Well, Saint Ephraim was born in Syria. He was raised a very intelligent young man, knew both Greek and Syriac, and ultimately ended up working in the government. In fact, he was there for many, many years while the emperor was assigning him to take all sorts of important roles. At one point, in the 500s, Antioch was beset by terrible earthquakes, a series of them, starting around 525 and again in 528. And Ephraim was then asked to try and establish the rebuilding of the city, which he did to great acclaim, showing wisdom and much love and compassion for the people. And in fact, this spread about him all over. Well, one day, he happened to see a laborer who was working on the rebuilding of a certain building, and St. Ephraim had what almost seemed like a vision. He saw a fiery pillar leading up from the top of this particular man all the way up into heaven. After the vision was ended, he, quite startled at the time, went and spoke with the man and demanded to know who he was. The man was very hesitant to say anything, but ultimately he revealed that he was, in fact, a former bishop. He had left his see for some reason, and we do not know what that reason was. But this bishop prophesied that Saint Ephraim would one day be Patriarch of Antioch. This, in fact, ultimately did happen. He became a monk and then was elected to the Holy See of the Patriarchate of Antioch, where he remained for a number of years, deeply involved in trying to purge the various regions of the non-Chalcedonian heresy, which was running rampant at the time. This was, of course, the age of Justinian I. This was the age of the building of the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and there were many, many religious disputes going on at that time. Well, Saint Ephraim, in fact, trying to convince the non-Chalcedonians of the error of their ways, many times he was successful and sometimes he wasn't, ran into a certain stylite. Now, these stylites, as you might recall, were those monks who were dedicated to service in God through intense prayer and supplication for the whole world by remaining on top of very tall pillars their entire lives. Well, Saint Ephraim disputed with one particular stylite who was a non-Chalcedonian. And this particular man said, well, we're going to set a pyre over here. We're going to set it ablaze. And you and I should both enter into it and see whose particular thoughts on this subject are correct. Who has the right theology? So Saint Ephraim took his omophorion, the great vestment that is the signature vestment of a bishop, and he hurled it into the fire. And after 3 hours, he retrieved it out of the fire, and it was completely unharmed. The non-Chalcedonian stylite, having seen this, immediately admitted the error of his ways and embraced orthodoxy. Saint Ephraim had to deal with many things like this in his capacity as patriarch. Some of them, of course, were not very pleasant because they involved removing such factions from the various territories that were causing disputes with the Orthodox. But finally, in 546, he laid down his life in peace after having lived a life that was quite extraordinary in many ways, that touched on all sorts of different areas that we ourselves are involved with every day of our lives, but came through it all with a firm confession of faith and a true believer in the faith that was professed at the Fourth Council of Chalcedon and the subsequent councils that followed, of which one he was actually the presider over. St. Ephraim's fervor and devotion to the Lord is something that we can imitate today with our own confession of faith. We may not be as influential as he ultimately ended up being, but in our own small circle, you never know how a proper confession of the Orthodox faith may indeed change lives. Bye-bye.